All right. Josh, would you like to introduce yourself? Oh, you're still muted, Josh.
Sorry about that. Yeah, good morning, everybody, and thanks, Callie. I am Josh Fanek. I work for Montana Campus Compact, and I'm the associate director here. I have had several roles over the years. I started in the year 2000 as our very first Vista leader, so I've got some hands-on kind of national service experience supporting Vista members across the state right when we were getting our Vista project going. After that, I ran our Vista project for about 5 years as the program manager. So I was the then Aaron Barstow of Montana Campus Compact. I ran a college student AmeriCorps program called Community Partners for a number of years. And then I moved into a role called Network Services Director, where I kind of figured out how we looked at our campuses around the state and figured out how we would support them and kind of make our programs sort of as relevant and kind of position them as closely to what they needed as possible. So I'm excited to be here today. We're talking about stakeholder awareness and community involvement, which are kind of a crucial couple of things when it comes to putting together projects that actually get used by communities. I think oftentimes communities kind of get things done to them, and I think we all know when this happens, we see kind of like the playground that doesn't get used because it's in a weird place, or the skate park that maybe is kind of empty a lot of the time because kids don't skateboard particularly, and weren't involved in the making of the project or the thinking about early on of the project. So we're going to be talking about that today. Forward along here. So as you all know, kind of the community building life cycle, or the Community Building Institute, is built around this idea that there's this practice called community building life cycle that's built around the community need or the problem that you're trying to address with your work. So if you're a Vista member, you're looking at a sustainable way to deal with a poverty problem. Perhaps it's low-income people getting into post-secondary education, or it's a hunger problem where people are not getting access to enough nutritious food. We all have something that our project is built around specifically. If you're an AmeriCorps member, it's probably a more direct, we're kind of at the implementation phase of this project, and we are working with kids in an after-school program to make sure that they get the academic support they need to be successful, for example. So this community life cycle is based around the idea that you start by kind of assessing carefully what community needs are, and we've talked about that as part of the CBI. You move on to awareness raising, so saying like, okay, we know we've got a problem with hunger in our community and it affects us in this way. What are we going to do about it collectively? So each of the CBI sessions clearly kind of is built around one of these ideas. Today we're working on that awareness piece. Other sessions we'll talk about implementation strategies. That's really what we've turned the social media. It's heavily about implementing, a strategy or intervention to deal with a problem. The planning phase, clearly an important part of community work. Evaluation and assessment. And these things, they go in a circle and they seem to not end, and that is really the idea. The arrows all go in one direction here, and largely that's because, starting with some sort of a needs assessment and moving into awareness raising organizing community groups is a pretty logical start. But it also makes sense at sometimes to go back and say, well, where is community energy or where is community awareness on this issue right now? Or where are we at for actually planning this intervention? It seems maybe this was a little bit hasty and folks are not, making use of the tool we put together. Let's go back to that planning phase or check in with our advisory group. So good to remember that those arrows actually go both directions. Questions or thoughts on the whole community building life cycle? I'm going to try to just let folks kind of either use the chat feature or holler, unmute yourselves and jump in. This really is the key thing that all of the community building institute sort of focuses around. We'll do individual sessions, but this graphic here is really kind of it in a nutshell, kind of the crucial way to think about how we do community change work or leave communities in better shape and help them to address big challenges themselves. Okay, well, I'll keep moving along. Little beautiful snapshot of the Bears Paw Mountains outside of Havre. So for today, we'll spend a fair amount of time talking about stakeholders, which is kind of the nonprofit or social sort of services, human needs sector way of talking about people who have some kind of investment or some kind of ownership over the work we do. Who are they? What's their importance? What they do with regard to our work. And then we'll talk about some key communication strategies and ways that we can get community members involved. If folks could take a moment here and just using the chat feature, type in one goal that you've got for today's session. I want to make sure that we kind of get at everything or spend some time kind of with thinking through, making sure that this is relevant material. So if you could take a minute and just say like, okay, I want to get some ideas for X, or I'm trying to learn about this. I would sure appreciate that. Take a minute just for that, please. Well, as you do that, I'm going to start moving along, but please take a minute just to think through, like, what do I want to get out of this? So I want to make sure we meet expectations. All right, for Maria, we have figuring out who my stakeholders are. Good. We'll keep revisiting the chat there. So this is kind of some definition stuff here. Stakeholders kind of is a pretty simple concept, and a lot of these things come back to almost alarmingly simple concepts, and I think that's why these are good practices. It's because they make a lot of sense. A stakeholder is somebody who's affected or who could be affected by the service you provide. So that's a pretty decent list of folks. I think top of the heap is if you're in the nonprofit sector or the education sector, working as a national service member or a supervisor. These are the clients or the customers, maybe the youth in an after-school program or the kids in an academic, mentoring program or in getting academic support in college. They're at the top of the heap, but they're not the only ones who have some kind of a interest in the success or who could be affected by the work that you do. Others, of course, are those that support it financially, employees of the organization, or staff. You know, if you work at a Boys and Girls Club, the folks who work for the Boys and Girls Club, the board of directors or boards of directors are clearly folks who have an interest in the success or the work, or who could be affected by the service that gets provided. Volunteers, other nonprofits and partners, partner organizations, folks with a financial stake like loan holders or mortgage, like a bank, people who provide supplies to the organization, you know, if it's a school lunch program, you know, making sure that that lunches are reaching those that need them most. Got a couple more folks in the chat weighing in. Let's see here. Callie says, understand how to engage all stakeholders evenly without playing favorites. How to keep my project accountable to the interests of stakeholders, supporters, and clients. How to involve stakeholders. From Matthew, I am particularly interested in communication strategies, i.e. how can an organization make the community as a whole aware of and invested in their work? How to adjust efforts to stakeholder needs and inputs. And from Emma, with so many stakeholders from different areas, what's the best way to get them, what's the best way to engage, to get them to engage with each other? All right, these are great questions, and we'll keep them up there and revisit them. We'll also have a time for a breakout toward the end of the session, where we'll put you into, I think probably we'll do 3 rooms and have some opportunity to talk and share your specific projects with your peers. So that'll be coming here. Who else kind of fits under this, this definition of folks who are affected by the service that you provide? All right. Well, if I thought of it all, feel free to continue using the chat or unmute yourselves. So I'm curious, who are your specific projects or your organization's stakeholders? Who would like to share some of the folks that that will be affected or are affected by the work of your organization? Who are some of these people? Again, feel free to unmute. I think it's okay that folks besides old Josh are talking this morning here. Happy to have you jump in if you do have audio. So Navraj says, low-income people and homeless individuals or families. Or maybe that was JJ. It looks like you're logged in together. Yeah, if you're doing national service, I think that's hopefully somewhere very near the top is somebody who doesn't have quite the same kind of privilege or position that you know that others do, and this work will benefit them. Rachel says, the bounty of the Bridgers feeds students at MSU. So I'd say the major stakeholder would be the Dean of Students, who is focused on student crisis management. Okay. Yeah, so probably from a funding perspective, the Dean of Students would be a huge stakeholder. And clearly, hungry MSU students would be on that list as well. Great. Hussein says, parents, therapeutic providers, schools, etc. Oh, sorry. Imad, you show up as Hussein S. have you interacted with your stakeholders, and are these folks aware of their role as a stakeholder? Are my kind of follow-up questions here. Maria says, Latinx students, employees, and board of directors at Fisher College. Andrew says, under-resourced students and their families, Gallatin College, MSU, local employees, economic leaders. Julia says, faculty, staff, dean, provost, board members, students, community. Iman says, reaching out to them via community needs assessment survey at the moment. Okay, excellent. So good Vista projects are very much centered around the folks that they aim to benefit. And this comes from some pretty radical thinking, that if you want somebody to engage with and kind of really benefit fully from the work that you're trying to do, it's good to ask them what they want. I think we all know this in some kind of way. You know, we do it on a daily basis. We make choices, and that means that we are better kind of engaged with things. Some of this gets to kind of, some power theory, and folks who are from, low-income background oftentimes don't have the same access as many of us that have privilege to kind of engage with decision making. And that's a really powerful thing for communities to take ownership of what they want and how they want to deal with problems. Can be a hugely empowering thing, and be what makes a project successful or means that a project is unsuccessful. So it's a simple concept, and I think we're all sort of in some fundamental way aware of it, but we see every day great examples of folks who have not asked end users or beneficiaries how they want something to be structured or what their needs are, and those things flop or just end up not being used whatsoever. Okay, we'll keep on moving here. Those are the Sweetgrass Hills. Apparently I have a North Central Montana fixation today. I don't know why I'm not able, oh, here we go. So clearly stakeholders are kind of at the center of this work to do community change. And they're hugely important. I tend to think if there's kind of a, most important stakeholder for community work it is the community of folks that your project aims to benefit. Clearly there are more than that, but keeping kind of your those folks involved heavily in the decision making of a project will really lead to a project that sustains well and that is effective. They should hold huge influence over organizations and programs in the nonprofit sector and kind of social change world that we're in. We talked about this idea of effectiveness and how deep engagement with a stakeholder community can mean that this project or intervention that you're trying to put together actually is effective. They can have huge political impact and help kind of sway the people and kind of power structures that provide resources to better support this work. That can lead to financial support, kind of the broader network of community. What are other ways that stakeholders hold influence over organizations and programs that you see? Give you all a second to type in there or unmute. Some of the big sort of theoretical background for this, the idea is this idea of agency and letting people have agency over the program or project that is meant to benefit them is a hugely strong way of doing kind of community work. It means that something that goes from being done to people, which, you know, if you grew up in poverty, you're used to having people do things to you, essentially. You know, you don't get a lot of choice. You kind of oftentimes, you know, don't get the luxury of kind of that sense of agency that lots of us get to feel. And so if a project is really going to be successful, kind of figuring out, okay, how do we kind of actually get people to take ownership and engage with it? Offering that, and it's not always easy, because I think we you know, this can be messy stuff, and folks may not kind of share the vision, and it may take a lot of time to kind of get people, you know, working in the same direction, but it's a good thing. So Julia says, definitely creating leadership, self-advocacy opportunities. An example I have for kind of stakeholder involvement and the importance of it, I was a Peace Corps volunteer from 1997 to 1999, and my main project was teaching English as a foreign language. So I was a high school teacher helping a country that was emerging from 50 years as part of the Soviet Union reintegrate with the world and figure out kind of how it moved into its kind of next phase. So that was pretty straightforward. There wasn't really a lot of you know, sustainability thinking or kind of project work with my day-to-day Peace Corps assignment. But I did get to participate in creating a health curriculum with a national health curriculum as part of my service. And a big part of why we were able to actually launch and have something take effect across a whole country was that as we put together kind of the planning workshop for how we would use English language kind of instruction as an opportunity to talk about kind of modernizing you know, some of the health curriculum in the country, was that we involved students in kind of the writing of that curriculum, and we let them lead, you know, what is most important, what do you see, how should we go about this? And it went from being something that, you know, could seem like it was being done to students from teachers to something that was extremely relevant and that students across the country really responded well to. So it kind of had this powerful impact on me that it's easy to get in that mindset of thinking like, well, I know the right way to do this, or I know what needs to be done, or I know what these folks need. But really, we're individuals and we know what we need. And if somebody does that thinking for us, our investment in change is really minimal. If somebody's like, you need to do this, how often do we respond positively? I know in my own case, it's not terribly often, but if I get a chance to kind of co-create the thing that is going to get done, I'm much more apt to stick around, keep engaged with it, and actually end up benefiting from it. Okay, so some of the roles and functions of stakeholders, you know, top of the list here, stakeholders will be the beneficiaries of the project or intervention. So these are the, you know, we've talked about clients or users, oftentimes students that benefit. They're the folks that are doing the work with you, that are helping to figure out, okay, structurally, how do we sort of set this food pantry up so that it's a welcoming space and that takes into account all of the, the tricky things that go on when you're going to be using an emergency food pantry or a food pantry of any sort. Really figuring out how does this experience work? Not only like, can we get food to people, but are they going to use it? Are they going to feel good about themselves as they do it? How do we anticipate that stuff? They're the folks that support the organization financially. So donors or funders as well. They should provide input and direction on programming and services, sort of help steer kind of like, the how of what your project is about, and help to understand the scope of the problem in your community. You may have some good data on what it looks like. Hunger on college campuses I don't know why I'm continuing to use this example, but is an increasing problem. Lots of folks are not getting their kind of base nutritional needs met while they're in college, and that's a huge growing need nationally. And those students themselves can help explain kind of the scope and breadth of the problem within the community and where it comes from and how to deal with it. And they can also help build ties with other organizations or groups that are doing similar work. What are some other roles and functions that a stakeholder has in your experience? Oh, sorry. Waiting for the chat here. Okay, I'm going to keep moving down. Feel free just to put it in when something pops into your mind. So we talked a little bit about power and interest, and this is a matrix that kind of you can use to map out sort of thinking about how to get a stakeholder engaged. So this kind of the left-hand sort of vertical side of it is power from low to high, and the horizontal side is interest. So you start down here with kind of low power, low interest, and that whole zone is kind of the monitor phase. Like, can folks kind of have a look at what your organization is doing and know about it? Pretty passive, right? Over here, a little more high interest, still low power, keeping informed. So maybe not just sort of seeing bits and pieces here and there, but having a decent sense of what your work is about, what your organization is doing, or the cause that you're working at. You start getting into a bit more high interest. You're still low power though. Moving over to encourage and influence. So notice kind of the difference. You go from information, somebody's got some information, into I'm able to use that information to do something. So this encouragement or this influence, so saying like, okay, I can kind of shape a little bit how this thing takes shape. I really think we should figure out how we have a childcare option available if we're convening working class families to talk about this issue, and and we expect them to come and engage with it. Let's figure out that. So you start getting into a greater degree of interest, and that comes with some power sharing and saying, like, you get to actually shape this thing as the person who, or group of people who would benefit from it. And then finally, you've got high power, high interest here, with the keep satisfied kind of realm. It's not only are you getting to influence, but you're hearing that your needs are being heard, and this work is responding actively to them. So kind of the more power that gets shared with folks, the more likely they are to take a deeper interest and have a greater engagement with the work you're doing. Oftentimes we hear in kind of the nonprofit sector or the education sector this litany of, gosh, it's just really difficult to get people out for my meeting. I struggle to sort of figure out how to get folks engaging with my project. And the question that we typically ask is, how authentic an opportunity are you giving people to take the lead, or really kind of to provide a meaningful kind of let their needs steer the work that you're doing. And oftentimes folks don't like giving that up, because it means perhaps doing things differently, kind of refiguring the work plan, the sort of the issues around ego. Like, if you've really got a great idea, like, man, we need a skate park here, and nobody skateboards. That's one of my favorite examples is kind of like the preponderance of skate parks in the 90s and early 2000s in communities where there had not been, where maybe skateboards and skateboarding did not really exist. And people didn't really get a chance to say, like, well, what we really would like to see is X and Y and Z, but they got a skate park. So I think this matrix is a good tool for thinking about stakeholder engagement and the questions and the structure of meetings. So really, from a practical standpoint, figuring out, how do we offer up a pretty authentic opportunity for folks to say, we want this stuff, we understand the problem, and here are some of the things that would help us. And sometimes it's very surprising. They may not seem like a direct line between school performance and some of the things that stakeholders like parents might say, but what's important to people has huge influence on the things that we work on together. So in terms of the expectations of stakeholders, this is kind of a similar idea. The greater you figure out opportunities for deep stakeholder engagement, you move from you have their attention and interest into you get their desire to participate, and then ultimately their action. So it really is kind of just like this this notion that the more that you're actively sharing the power and letting other folks kind of influence and structure what the intervention or project looks like, the more that you're going to have a workforce ready to help you put it together. And it's a pretty, when you think of yourself, I think this makes a lot of sense. We're always kind of making decisions based upon self-interest, and our own ability to kind of engage with a thing means that we'll either be involved with it or not. So the more engaged, the more that we can move communities into action, and the more that we share that kind of that power or ownership, the more likely that we have a very action-oriented group of folks that are going to work on the problem with you. Wrong direction. Okay, so one of the questions I think that had come up when we talked about expectations was, how do we align various stakeholders around a common vision so that, you know, what we end up getting, the outcomes or the change or the impact that you want to see happen actually can happen? Because we know working with groups of people can seem very chaotic, and people may have like just a whole host of things they want to do, and they may not align perfectly. More than likely, they don't align perfectly. This is absolutely process work, and it takes time, and it takes conversation and education and deep engagement to talk about, okay, what we have funding for or what our organization's cause is this. So in some sort of fashion, we need to be doing work at this, but we absolutely want to hear how specifically that looks, and you need to help us inform that. You all, if you kind of are AmeriCorps Vista members or AmeriCorps members participating today, you may have done sort of an exercise with Post-it notes where you kind of have a long list of brainstormed topics, and then you can basically let folks take a vote and say, you get 3 Post-it notes. We have 15 ideas for how we devote our time or how this takes shape. Let's choose as a community the top 3 priorities we have, because we know the other 12 are going to be too many. It's very participatory, it's democratic. People get to see, okay, most of us end up in these 3 areas, and while there are many things that we, maybe a few of us, care about, most of our energy is behind these 3 things. So there are lots of tools out there like that, you know, voting or things akin to that, where you're using, you know, flip chart paper and a Post-it note. But it very much is process work, and it takes time to kind of do that deep education about what is the nature of this problem or need that we're working on. What does the research say that folks who deal with this successfully, what are some of the ways that folks have dealt with this successfully, and how might we kind of structure our work that way? That will turn people from kind of a passive, you know, community member into somebody advocating and working behind this cause as well. So some of the ways that you can get into educating stakeholders include kind of the written forms that we're all aware of, places like newsletters, websites, annual reports, evaluations or performance reports. You know, in the world of social media, this is going to be a later CBI session. You know, educating people about needs in communities is happening constantly. If you follow nonprofits, you know, this is kind of like the meme with a percentage on it that says, you know, something kind of alarming that grabs your attention and just says like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that. I think increasingly that's, you know, where a lot of folks learn about needs in their communities, is they know they care about an organization, so they choose to follow it, and that organization really does kind of social media effectively and uses it as this great platform for talking about what their cause is and why it's necessary. A few other kind of more participatory forms are things like open forums, where you gather up a community of stakeholders together. Social media is certainly more participatory if, you know, you get into the comments side of things, or kind of like you liking and so forth. In some ways it's participatory, in other ways it's relatively passive. I don't know if the jury is out completely, but certainly from an educational standpoint, it has huge power for telling a story. Traditional media, you know, getting the newspaper to cover some work that you're doing, engaging with them, often is as simple as a call to a newsroom or a press release about an important meeting where some pretty important things are going to be discussed. Individual kind of one-on-one meetings, certainly with some of the stakeholders that are sort of on the funder or board level. Oftentimes an individual meeting is a good way to kind of get a sense of what drives people to be involved and what their priorities are. Public meetings, events, training opportunities that maybe your organization runs, all of those could be much more participatory than just sort of the written ideas above. So I'm curious, what are some of the ways that in your service or your work that some of the strategies that you've used or that you plan to use to educate stakeholders, and what did you find was effective? Again, let's use the chat, or feel free to unmute. Who's going to be the brave soul who unmutes themselves? I'm looking for a good up-to-the-minute kind of example of, yeah, we tried this and it worked, or we struggled to get it to work. Who'd like to share? All right, thanks, Rachel. So Rachel's project is called Bounty of the Bridgers, and it's with Montana State University, where they did some assessment and learned that there were a large number of students whose kind of nutritional needs were not being met. So she says, for our pantry, having stakeholders involved in the operation of the pantry allows them to see the need and also utilize it simultaneously. Oh, awesome. Navraj and JJ say, giving reports at board meetings about what has happened with the project or with the program. Yep, that's a great way to educate. And then Rachel adds, so encouraging contribution and utilization by all stakeholders. Yeah, I think sometimes folks have noticed there's huge stigma around poverty issues. If you're using services, a lot of folks just, it's hard sometimes to feel good about that. And that issue there is I think a critical one to how effective our projects are. Thinking about like how do we kind of build in dignity to this this thing that we're trying to do? How do we make it seem like this is something that folks have an opportunity to shape themselves? That it's not a handout, but it's kind of that support and that you're doing things with others. Andrew says, visits to high schools, tours, and info sessions at Gallatin College. Dual enrollment website, would like to publish a newsletter. Awesome. Yeah, I think those are all excellent examples of how you kind of get the word out about post-secondary education and the opportunities. Julia shares, I've recently worked with some of our stakeholders to update the civic engagement website at NLU, taking out things that are no longer active and creating a more up-to-date site. Yeah, that's, I think the idea of, continually that the internet changes sort of on a daily basis, and oftentimes folks have had websites that have been out there for years without updates. That's it may seem like, not the most dramatic of things, but if you're like, look, this is our kind of public face, this is the internet, and our website should reflect where we're at as an organization, that can be huge. Great examples, thank you. So we'll keep moving here. More tips on engaging stakeholders. I think directly inviting people's participation is something that organizations oftentimes don't do. They want, can be a huge amount of work to figure out how do we actually structure opportunities for folks to weigh in and help us plan out our programming, our work, the stuff we do. Good to be very clear about the roles and expectations. So folks, if they're coming in an advisory capacity, that you're very clear about that ultimately you have a board of directors and they make final decisions about funding, or, these things are done collectively so that people are not crushed when they hear that perhaps their ideas are not immediately going to be acted upon. You can address that in the setup phase if you're clear about what the specific roles are. And advisory boards are hugely effective, I think, for making sure that programs and interventions are structured in a way that really makes sense to the communities that will end up using them. Other ways, offering to help them. Opportunities to figuring out how do we build reciprocal partnerships so that there's a clear, we need something from you, and that is important to our work. So it's not simply seen as, well, we've got everything, we'd like you to kind of help us figure it out, but that kind of high opportunity for engagement and reciprocity, and asking openly what they need from you. And then figuring out how to demonstrate like a high likelihood of success and being confident about achieving the common goals that you set forth. So approaching things with, kind of an attitude that says like, we have enormous challenges, but the more of us that are working on them, the higher chance we have of being successful and getting things done. We're getting close here to the breakout time, so I'm going to kind of cruise along so that you can talk in smaller groups. I want to make some time for that. Stakeholders are your largest advocates. When they become kind of part of your cause, they offer enormous opportunity that offers kind of the organization or the work that you're doing huge opportunities for growth and success. And it really amplifies in a kind of grassroots sort of way. You can't buy the kind of support that people will give you if they really care about your work and the cause that you're working behind. So as you frame this, you need to think about how you work together to kind of do more mission or more good, and be careful about keeping that in the foreground. If your organization is about this and ending hunger in kind of the Gallatin Valley, then that really needs to be front and center. And it's a very tangible, clear thing to focus on. To reach more people, to address or resolve the problems that the work was that the program was created for, to raise more money, to engage more volunteers. All of these are ways that kind of really building strong advocates for a program. Those are some of the payoffs that you can hope to see with an empowered stakeholder group. So what are some ways that you have successfully engaged stakeholders as advocates for the work that you're doing? So my thought for the breakout is I'm going to have Callie put together 3 breakout rooms. These will be done randomly. So take a minute first to introduce yourselves, name your role and where you're serving. And then I'd like you to kind of have a conversation that touches on how you've seen stakeholders influencing your organization and what's a goal that you have around engaging stakeholders in your project. So those are the 2 major questions that I'd like you to kind of chew on with your team. And then we will come back and we will hear from one person will kind of give us an overview of some of the themes that came up in your breakouts. So questions about the breakout portion here. We will come back in 10 minutes, and the last thing we'll do is kind of have this group conversation about what were some of the themes that emerged and what some of folks' goals were around engaging stakeholders in their projects. And then we'll wrap up for the morning. So, sound good? All right. Callie Foster says yes. So, commence breakout. I don't know if anybody is like me and they remember the Atari game Breakout, but that's what this this image is from.
Hello?
Hi there. I've moved everyone back into the general meeting, and it looks like we have one breakout room that still has about 10 seconds to join us.
Are we muted?
All right. Callie, are folks back? Looks like we got 11 back. Maybe one of the groups, not yet.
Everyone should be back at this point. So maybe a couple people had to skip out early.
Okay, well, we'll just proceed along. Thank you. So I joined a breakout group with Julia, Paxton, Imad, and Antoinette. I think we're all of us. And I think Imad is going to tell us about what some of the big themes that came out were. Maybe not.
Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, hi. Sorry. So, I mean, what I did notice, though, is that not everyone is necessary. Like myself, I haven't actually, a lot of the stakeholders haven't been directly reached out to. I'm kind of going through via survey community assessment. And I've reached out to people who I'm potentially going to contact, some of them. But mine's more indirect. A lot of the people, they've actually seemed to have like visited different stakeholders and having meetings, some things along that line. Kind of lost for words at this point, but let's see.
Yeah, it seemed like one of the common themes was that for the folks on this call, stakeholders are setting the agenda, I would say, for each of the folks that talked in our group. So I was pretty excited about that. Who would like to go for the next group? Oh, man.
Hi, I guess I'll go. This is Rachel. So I kind of mentioned it earlier, but a lot of how we interact with our stakeholders is through direct involvement. And this has occurred both with clients of the pantry, but then also donors. A lot of our donors really want to see the impact themselves, and so they want to be there organizing shelves and like sorting food and stuff like that. And so we try to do it across the whole spectrum because, like you kind of mentioned earlier, there's a stigma about hunger. And so having client interactions with the donors and having it all happen at the food pantry is really important to kind of cross all of those different boundaries. And then kind of in the future, I am actively participating in a lot of other programs around the community who are our donors and our sponsors and stuff. So I, as a representative of our little pantry, are also trying to contribute to the larger organizations that are contributing to us. So my next goal is kind of like that, having our clients and our students who use the pantry also give back to our donors, you know, so it goes both ways in the big long run.
Cool. Thanks, Rachel. Is there one more group that met? Some themes that came out of your conversation? We are right at 12:01 Montana time, so we should wrap it up, but I think we have time for quickly hearing the third group if somebody is willing. I really wish I just could cue up the Jeopardy music and these strange pauses. It would be amazing. Well, I'll take that as maybe the third group is going to pass on that. Thank you all for your engagement today and taking this seriously. My contact information is here, and definitely keep an open door policy on just making myself available. So thank you, and stay tuned for our next Tuesday session. Callie, you want to talk about what's coming for the final CBI?
Sure. So our final CBI session 6, titled Social Media and Marketing for Nonprofits, is going to be on Tuesday, October 23rd from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. with Morgan Slimberger. She works at the University of Montana Blackstone Launchpad here. So we're really excited to have her. Please look for an email from me this afternoon with a recap of this session, with the recording, as well as an evaluation. Josh, your contact information did not show on the screen, so if you would like to share your screen one more time, people could get that
Sorry about that.
Yep, so there it is. I'll leave it up there for another minute or so before closing out the meeting if anyone would like to take a picture or write this down. I will also try to get the slides from Josh to then give to all of the participants today if any of you are interested in looking back at this. Thanks, Josh, and thanks everyone for coming today. We look forward to seeing you for our final CBI Fall 2018 session next week on Tuesday, October 23rd.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Callie.